She threw the coins at his feet before he could finish the sentence. Every last one of them, the $3 she'd saved across 14 months of washing other women's floors, mending other women's dresses, swallowing other women's cruelty. With a smile, she didn't mean scattered across the frozen platform boards of Red Hollow Station, and rang out like a verdict. "Keep it," Eliza Vane said. "I don't take charity from men who've already decided what I'm worth. If you've ever been told you were too much and not enough at the exact same time, stay with me." Subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happens next in Red Hollow, Kansas, changed everything for Eliza Garrick and for every soul in that forgotten town. The train had been 3 hours late, and by the time it groaned into Red Hollow Station, the August heat had turned the air into something you could press between your fingers like wet cloth. Eliza Vane stepped down from the third car, not the second where the town's better families rode, and not the first, which carried mail and freight, and the kind of men who didn't bother removing their hats for anyone but the third, which smelled of coal smoke and old leather, and the particular exhaustion of people who had been traveling too long with too little. She carried one bag. A worn canvas thing, army green once, now the color of something that had given up on having a color. It hung from her right hand, and she didn't let it drag. That was the first thing anyone who watched her might have noticed, that she didn't let anything drag. The second thing they noticed was Eliza herself. She was a large woman. Not apologetically large. Not the kind of large that folds inward and makes itself smaller to accommodate the discomfort of others, but solidly, fully, undeniably present in the way that a well-built structure is present. She moved through the platform crowd with the steady authority of someone who had learned long ago that the world did not automatically make space for her and had decided to stop waiting for it to do so. The station master, a thin man named Dolph Crane with a mustache that seemed to be compensating for something, watched her cross the platform and made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite a word. The woman beside him, his wife presumably given the way she clutched his arm, said quietly, "My goodness," and turned to look at something else entirely. Eliza heard both of them. She'd been hearing versions of that her entire life. She stopped at the edge of the platform and looked out at Red Hollow properly for the first time. She'd seen the advertisement in the Kansas City Courier 3 weeks and 2 jobs ago. Domestic help sought. Cooking, cleaning, general household assistance. Wage board and meals provided. Inquire Hale Ironworks, Red Hollow, KS. It had been a quarter-page notice plainly worded. No flourishes, no promises it couldn't keep. She'd appreciated that. She'd answered it the same way: 1 page, her name, her skills, her availability. No flourishes. No promises she couldn't keep. The reply had come back in 4 days. Position available. Report August 14th. G. Hale. That was it. No welcome, no warmth. No indication of what G. Hale looked like or how old he was or whether he had a wife or children or a temper. Just a date and 2 words that functioned as a name. She had packed her bag and bought her ticket. Red Hollow was smaller than the advertisement had implied, which was to say it was smaller than almost anything could imply while still technically constituting a town. It had a main street with the usual arrangement of establishments, dry goods, bank, saloon, church, post office, and several side streets of the kind that didn't really justify being called streets. The silver mine on the eastern hill had played out 6 years ago, according to the woman on the train who told Eliza more about Red Hollow than she'd asked to know, and the town had been declining gradually ever since, in the way that towns do when the thing that made them necessary stops being necessary. Used to be lively, the woman had said, adjusting her hat. Used to have 3 hotels and a theater company that came through twice a year. Now it's got 1 hotel with 4 rooms, and the theater building's a feed store. She'd paused, smoothing her skirt. Still, folks are decent enough. Mostly. Eliza had noted the mostly and filed it away. She asked for directions to Hale Ironworks from a boy of about 12, who was sitting on the post office steps doing nothing in particular with great dedication. He pointed down the main street and to the left told her it was the building with the big chimney, and then stared at her canvas bag, with the frank curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to be rude about it. "You the new woman," he said. "For Mr. Garrick." "I expect so," Eliza said. "He ain't easy," the boy said. "Not unkindly, just informatively the way you'd tell someone that a road has ruts." "Neither am I," Eliza said, and kept walking. She heard the ironworks before she saw it, that deep rhythmic percussion of metal on metal steady as a heartbeat, and twice as purposeful. She turned the corner and found the building exactly where the boy had said, a low, wide structure with a chimney that was indeed very large and currently producing a thin column of smoke despite the August heat. The main doors were open. The sound was coming from inside. Eliza set her bag down outside the door, straightened her collar, and walked in. The man at the anvil didn't look up. He was working a piece of iron a hinge, she thought, or the beginning of one, turning it with long-handled tongs, while the hammer came down in that same steady rhythm she'd heard from the street. He was tall and broad, through the shoulders, wearing a leather apron over a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair was dark and somewhat overlong, and there was a scar along the left side of his jaw that she could see even from across the room. He worked the way people work when they've been doing something so long that it has stopped being a task and become simply a state of being. She waited. The hammer came down 3 more times. Then he stopped, set the hammer aside, turned the iron and the tongs to inspect it, and finally looked up. He had gray eyes. Not the romantic gray of poetry, just the flat, practical gray of weathered wood or river stone. They settled on her without particular expression, the way eyes settle on something they are assessing rather than judging. "Eliza Vane," he said. "Yes, sir." "You're early." She considered pointing out that the train had been 3 hours late, and that she was therefore arguably quite late, but she looked at his face and decided this was not a conversation that would benefit either of them. "The train made good time," she said. He set the tongs down on the anvil, pulled a cloth from the apron's front pocket, and wiped his hands. "Garrick Hale," he said. He did not extend his hand, but the way he said it was not unfriendly, just matter of fact, the introduction of a man who states things as they are and does not gild them. "I know," Eliza said. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression, not quite amusement, something in the same neighborhood. "House is behind the shop," he said. "I'll show you." The house was small and clean, in the way that the homes of people who live alone tend to be clean. Not comfortable, clean, but functional clean. The absence of clutter rather than the presence of care. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a main room with a fireplace that clearly saw more use in winter than this time of year, and a back porch that looked out toward a kitchen garden that had been planted and mostly ignored. "Your room's here." He opened the door to the smaller bedroom. It had a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a window. "Board and meals as agreed, day off Sunday. Wage at end of each month." "Yes, sir." "You cook?" "I do." "What else?" Eliza tilted her head slightly. "What do you need?" He looked at her steadily. "Windows need washing. Porch needs a board replaced. Garden's gone to hell. Smokehouse out back needs the shelves reorganized. I can never find anything in it." He paused. "I don't need anything fancy. I need things that work to keep working." "I can do all of that," Eliza said. "And you're not going to ask me about—" He stopped. "About what?" "Why the last woman left," he finished after a moment. Eliza looked at him evenly. "Did she leave for a reason I need to know about for my own safety?" Something in his face tightened, then released. "No." "Then it's none of my business," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back toward the door to the main room. "Supper's usually at 6. I don't eat large. There's supplies in the kitchen." He paused with his hand on the doorframe. "I work late sometimes. Don't wait up." "Understood." He left. Eliza stood in the small bedroom with her canvas bag at her feet and listened to his footsteps cross the main room, the back door open and close, and then the sound of the hammer starting up again from the shop. She sat down on the narrow bed. It didn't creak. That was something. She had not told him, she did not tell anyone, that she had been through 4 positions in the past 18 months. The first had ended when her employer's husband had decided her presence was an invitation. The second, when she'd asked to be paid the wage she'd been promised and was told she should be grateful for what she received. The third, when the family had moved east and replaced her with someone younger. The fourth, the one in Kansas City, when the woman of the house had said something at a dinner party in front of guests that Eliza was not going to spend the rest of her life absorbing. She had left that position on a Tuesday morning with her bag and her savings and the particular clarity of a woman who has decided finally that there is a limit. G. Hale's advertisement had appeared in the paper that same afternoon. She wasn't superstitious, but she'd noticed. The kitchen was well stocked in the disorganized way of a person who buys provisions sensibly but has no system for them. She found flour and cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork potatoes that needed to be used within the week, onions, a crock of lard, and in the back of the larder, a half jar of honey that someone had forgotten and that had crystallized beautifully. She also found a small tin of good coffee, which told her something about Garrick Hale's priorities that she filed away alongside the mostly. She made a simple supper, salt pork and beans, cornbread, coffee, and had it on the table at 10 minutes to 6. At 6 exactly, she heard the back door. He came in, had washed his hands and face at the pump outside, and sat down at the table without comment. He looked at the food. He looked at the coffee. He said nothing. He ate. She ate. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of two people who have both learned that talking for the sake of talking is a kind of lie, and who are not yet ready to say anything true. He finished, pushed back from the table, and said, "That's good. Thank you." He poured himself a second cup of coffee, took it to the main room, and didn't say anything else until morning. She did the dishes, checked the garden by lamplight, found it in exactly the state he'd described, and made a mental list of what needed doing first. The potato plants nearest the fence were salvageable. The squash had gone mostly to vine and needed cutting back. The beans were a loss, but there was time to replant a late variety if she did it within the week. She went to bed at 9 and slept better than she had in months. The next day, she replaced the porch board before breakfast. She found the planks in a stack at the side of the shop, selected one that matched the porch's existing wood in both width and weathering, located the tools she needed on a hook inside the shop's side door, and had the board fitted and nailed by the time the sun was fully up. She was testing the give of it with her foot, solid, no flex, when she heard a step behind her and turned to find Garrick standing in the shop doorway with his coffee. He looked at the board. He looked at her. He looked at the board again. "I was going to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "It's done now." He drank his coffee. "You know how to work a hammer like that?" "My father was a carpenter," she said. "Before the war." He nodded slowly. There was something in the way he did it, not condescending, not surprised exactly, but revising, like a man recalculating a sum. "Board in the smokehouse is soft too," he said. "Left side, second shelf. I'll look at it this afternoon." He went back into the shop. The town noticed her within 3 days. This was inevitable. Red Hollow was small enough that a new face registered like a change in weather, but the particular shape that the noticing took surprised her a little, or would have surprised her, if she'd still had the capacity for surprise on this subject. She was at the dry goods store on Thursday morning, working through a list of things the kitchen needed when she heard it. Two women talking in the next aisle, voices pitched at the level that is technically private and practically audible. "That's the one staying at Garrick Hale's." "I heard. Imagine." A pause. "She's very..." "Yes." "Do you think he knows what he's..." "I couldn't say. Men don't notice the same things we do." "Still, a man like Garrick taking in someone like..." Eliza turned the corner. The two women stopped talking. One of them was perhaps 50, with the careful dress of someone who considers their appearance a moral statement. The other was younger, maybe 35, with kind eyes that were currently doing complicated work to avoid Eliza's gaze. "Morning," Eliza said pleasantly, and looked at the shelf between them for the cornstarch she needed. "Good morning," said the older woman, recovering faster. She had the particular posture of someone who has decided to be civil as an exercise in superiority. "You must be Garrick Hale's new domestic." "That's right," Eliza said. She found the cornstarch. "I'm Adelaide Pruitt. My husband is Aldous Pruitt. He runs the bank." She said it the way people announce titles. "Eliza Vane," Eliza said. "Where are you from, Miss Vane?" "Most recently Kansas City." "And before that?" Eliza looked at her pleasantly. "Several places." She looked at the younger woman. "Morning." "Morning," the younger woman said, and had the grace to look somewhat ashamed of herself. Eliza paid for her things and left. At the post office, picking up a letter she'd arranged to have forwarded the postmaster, a heavy-set man named Orrin, who had the look of someone who'd been cheerful for so long, it had become structural. Told her without being asked that Garrick Hale had lived in Red Hollow for 11 years, built the ironworks from nothing, was the best blacksmith in 4 counties, and didn't socialize. "Not since his wife passed," Orrin said, weighing the letter in his hands before handing it over. "That was 4 years back. Margaret, good woman. He took it hard." "I imagine," Eliza said. "He ain't unfriendly," Orrin added quickly, as if this were important to establish. "Just," he searched for the word. "Contained." "Contained," Eliza repeated. "Like a boiler," Orrin said, then seemed to regret the metaphor. "I mean, he's got a lot going on inside is all. Just doesn't let it out." Eliza took her letter and thanked him. On Friday, old Mrs. Fenwick from the house 3 doors down knocked on the back door at mid-morning, holding a jar of preserved peaches and looking both determined and embarrassed, which was an interesting combination. "I heard Garrick had someone new," she said when Eliza opened the door. "Thought I'd bring these. He used to come by when Margaret was alive, for Sunday supper sometimes." She held out the peaches. "He doesn't anymore." Eliza took the peaches. "Would you like to come in, Mrs. Fenwick?" Something in the older woman's face shifted relief, maybe, or surprise. "I won't impose." "The coffee's already on," Eliza said. She came in. They sat at the kitchen table. Mrs. Fenwick was 81 years old and had come to Red Hollow as a young wife in 1847, had outlasted a husband, 2 sons, and the silver boom, and had opinions about most things which she shared with the freedom of someone who has decided that at 81 the social cost of honesty is negligible. "Adelaide Pruitt will have made you uncomfortable already," she said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. "She tried," Eliza said. Mrs. Fenwick made a sound that was possibly a laugh. "She tries with everyone. She tried with Margaret. Margaret told her very sweetly to mind her own business, and Adelaide admired her for it, because that's the kind of woman Adelaide is. She respects people who stand up to her. She just can't help trying first." She looked at Eliza steadily. "You'll be all right here." "I tend to be," Eliza said. "I know," Mrs. Fenwick said. "I can tell." She drank her coffee. "Garrick is a good man. He just went very quiet when Margaret died, and hasn't found his way back to Loud yet." She set the cup down. "He's not going to make things hard for you." "He hasn't," Eliza said. "Good." She stood slowly. "You keep those peaches. And if you need anything that a woman my age can provide, which admittedly isn't much anymore, you come and knock." "I will," Eliza said. "Thank you for the visit, Mrs. Fenwick." "Enid," the old woman said. "If you're going to be here, you might as well call me Enid." That evening, Garrick came in for supper and found the jar of preserved peaches on the windowsill. "Mrs. Fenwick came by," Eliza said, setting a plate of roasted pork and fried potatoes on the table. He looked at the jar for a moment. Something crossed his face, not quite grief, not quite warmth. Something in between. "She doing all right?" he said. "She seemed very well," Eliza said. "She was sharp as anything." He sat down. "She used to have us for supper. Her and Margaret would talk for hours." He picked up his fork. "I should have kept going by." Eliza said nothing. She sat down across from him with her own plate. He glanced up. "I mean, I should have—" He stopped. It wasn't anything against her. He stopped again. You went quiet, Eliza said. He looked at her. Mrs. Fenwick said you went quiet, Eliza said. After. Something shifted in his face. The gray eyes steadied the jaw with its scar still. Yeah, he said after a moment. I did. Eliza nodded. She picked up her fork. She doesn't hold it against you, she said. He was quiet for a while. Then quietly, I know. They ate. After supper, when he'd taken his coffee to the main room and she was finishing the dishes, she heard him through the doorway. The smokehouse board, he said. She dried her hands. I looked at it this afternoon. It's not soft, the shelf brackets pulled loose from the wall. I can reset it tomorrow if you have the right fasteners. A pause. There's a jar of screws on the third workbench, left side. I'll find them. Another pause. Then, you don't have to do that. I know, Eliza said. She heard the particular silence of a man choosing not to argue with something he doesn't entirely understand yet. She hung up the dish towel and went to check on the garden. By the end of the first week, she had reset the smokehouse shelf bracket, reorganized the smokehouse shelves by category and size, pruned the kitchen garden, replanted the bean row, repaired a loose hinge on the cellar door, washed every window in the house, and started a new batch of soap using the lard that was getting too old to cook with. She had also, without quite meaning to, established a relationship with 3 of Red Hollow's residents. Enid Fenwick, who came by every other morning now for coffee and conversation. Orrin at the post office, who greeted her by name and had begun including the town's general news in their transactions. And a 12-year-old named Tobias, the boy from the post office, steps she'd discovered, who appeared in the kitchen garden 3 days in a row, for no reason he could articulate, and was eventually put to work, turning compost, for which Eliza paid him with a square of cornbread, which seemed to satisfy him completely. Garrick watched all of this from a careful distance. He did not comment on the soap or the cellar hinge or the reorganized smokehouse. But she noticed that he found things in the smokehouse without having to look, and that he stopped a particular squeak the cellar door had been making. He noticed what she did without acknowledging that he noticed, which was a kind of noticing. She understood well. It was how she'd been raised to accept care from people who couldn't say they were offering it. On Saturday of the second week, he came in from the shop at 4 in the afternoon instead of 6, which was unusual. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her finishing a pie crust with the particular stillness of a man who has a question he hasn't decided whether to ask. She kept working. Town meeting tonight, he said finally. She pressed the crust into the pan. What kind of meeting? Supply meeting. Happens before winter every year. The committee goes over what provisions the town's laid and what families need assistance, what the county's promised. He paused. I usually go. That's good, Eliza said. You could... He stopped. If you wanted, to know people. Before winter. Eliza looked up. He was looking at the pie crust, not at her. Before winter, she said. Red Hollow winters are hard, he said. Harder than people expect if they haven't been through one. It's good to know your neighbors before it gets bad. Eliza looked at him for a moment. He still wasn't looking at her. The scar along his jaw caught the afternoon light. What time? She said. 7, he said. At the church hall. I'll have supper early, she said. He nodded and went back to the shop. She finished the pie crust and put the pie in the oven and thought about a man who had been quiet for 4 years, reaching very carefully for something that might become the shape of an ordinary evening. She thought about what Enid had said. He's got a lot going on inside, just doesn't let it out. She understood that. She understood it the way you understand something you've lived inside of for so long that it has stopped being a description and become simply the truth of things. The supply meeting was held in the church hall, a long room with plank benches and oil lamps, and the faint smell of candle wax and old wood that all church halls have, regardless of denomination or geography. About 40 people had come, which Eliza suspected was most of the town's adult population. She sat beside Garrick near the back and listened to a man named Croft, who was apparently the head of the supply committee, read figures from a ledger that made several people in the front rows exchange looks she didn't entirely understand. "We're expecting the county to deliver 200 sacks of grain before first frost," Croft was saying, "along with the standard winter allotment of medical supplies and lamp oil." "Same as last year," a man near the front called out. "More or less," Croft said, not quite looking up. "Last year's allotment came up short," the man said. "There were distribution complications," Croft said. "That's been addressed." The man didn't look convinced. Neither did several people around him. Eliza leaned slightly toward Garrick. "Who's the man asking questions?" "Dix Farley," Garrick said quietly. "He lost half his livestock last winter. Feed shortage." "And Croft?" "Manages the supplies. Has for 6 years." She looked at Croft's ledger, or rather at the angle at which he was holding it. She looked at the faces of the people in the front rows who had stopped looking at each other and were now looking at the middle distance with the particular expression of people who have decided not to make a scene. She filed all of this away. After the meeting in the cool night air outside the church hall, Garrick stood beside her and said nothing for a while, watching the town disperse. "Something's not right with those numbers," Eliza said. He looked at her sharply. "The grain allotment," she said. "He said more or less the same as last year, but last year came up short. That's not an error, that's a pattern." Garrick was very still. "What makes you say that?" "The way he held the ledger," she said. "The way the people in the front rows went quiet instead of arguing. They've argued before, and nothing changed." The gray eyes studied her. "You notice a lot," he said. "I've had to," she said. The night was warm still, the last of the summer heat holding on past its welcome, but there was something underneath it, a coolness at the edges, the first suggestion of what was coming. "It's going to be a hard winter," Garrick said. "Harder than usual," she said. "I can feel it in the iron," he said. And it was such a plain-spoken, unexplained thing to say that she believed him entirely. She looked out at this dark street, and the lights going out one by one in the windows of Red Hollow, and thought about patterns that become losses, and men who hold ledgers at angles, and a town that had already given up arguing. "Then we'd better be ready," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't disagree. They walked back to the house in the warm Kansas dark, not touching, not talking the way two people walk when they have run out of small things to say and haven't yet arrived at the true ones. The coolness Garrick had felt in the iron arrived 3 days later. Not as cold, not yet, but as a shift in the quality of the air that Eliza noticed the same way she noticed everything, quietly, precisely, and without making a production of it. She was at the kitchen table before dawn, working through the household accounts. What was in the larder? What was running low? What would need to be laid in before first frost? When she heard him come through the back door earlier than usual. He set something on the porch. She heard the weight of it. She got up and looked. 4 cords of firewood already split, stacked against the back wall, with the methodical precision of a man who has survived enough winters to stop taking them personally. She stood in the doorway and looked at the wood, and then at him. "It's August," she said. "It won't be," he said, and went back to the shop. She stood there a moment longer. Then she went back to the accounts and added firewood to the list of things she no longer needed to worry about. That morning, Tobias appeared in the garden again, this time with a younger boy in tow. His brother, apparently a round-faced child of about 8 named Cal, who said nothing but watched everything with enormous eyes. Eliza put them both to work, pulling the last of the dead bean plants, paid them each a square of cornbread, and listened while Tobias talked, which he did the way most 12-year-olds do, in a continuous, loosely organized stream that covered everything from the condition of the schoolteacher's horse to the argument his father had had with Croft at the feed store last week. She stopped him there. "What kind of argument?" she said. Tobias shrugged, pulling dead stalks. "Pa ordered 20 pounds of grain back in July. Prepaid and everything. Croft said it was in the ledger. But when Pa went to collect Croft, said there was a recording error, and the order wasn't in there." "What happened to the money?" "Croft said it'd be credited to fall supplies." Tobias tossed a dead stalk onto the pile. Pa said that was fine, because what else was he going to say? But he didn't think it was fine. Eliza looked at the boy steadily. How many families had that happen? Tobias looked up. Why? I'm curious. He thought about it. Mrs. Alderman said something happened with her lamp oil order. And the Dix Farleys, you heard Mr. Farley at the meeting, right? About last year's grain. He paused. Why are you asking? Because patterns matter, Eliza said. Keep pulling. He kept pulling, but he glanced at her sideways twice more before the morning was out with the expression of a boy who has just understood that an adult is paying attention to something most adults aren't. She was at the dry goods store that afternoon when she encountered Adelaide Pruitt, again this time without the younger woman. Adelaide was at the counter speaking to the storekeeper in the particular tone of a woman who considers commerce a social activity requiring her full theatrical participation. She noticed Eliza finished her sentence and turned. Miss Vane, she said. Settling in, are we? Very well, thank you, Eliza said. I imagine it must be an adjustment. Adelaide's smile was the kind that functions as a weapon. A woman of your background. Red Hollow is quite a small community, very close-knit. I've noticed, Eliza said. People look out for each other. Adelaide's smile tightened infinitesimally. Exactly. We're very protective of our own. Eliza met her eyes pleasantly. Good. A town should be. She turned to the storekeeper. I need 2 pounds of dried apples, a sack of navy beans, and whatever you have in the way of late-season preserving jars. The storekeeper, a quiet man named Bates, who clearly found Adelaide exhausting, and Eliza restful by comparison, turned to find what she needed. Adelaide said behind her, Of course Garrick Hale has always done things his own way. He never did care much what people thought. Eliza accepted this without turning around. That's a quality I respect in a person. A pause. He was very devoted to Margaret, Adelaide said. There was something in her tone, not quite cruelty, something more complicated than that. It surprised a great many people when he put an advertisement in the paper. So soon. 4 years. Eliza turned then and looked at her. Loss has its own timeline, Mrs. Pruitt, she said. Not yours or mine, his. She looked at the woman steadily. And I'm his cook, not a replacement for anything. Adelaide's chin lifted. I didn't imply. No, Eliza said. You didn't? Good afternoon. She paid for her things and left. She was halfway back to the house before she realized her hands were shaking slightly, not from anger, she'd been through too much for Adelaide Pruitt to make her genuinely angry, but from the effort of holding a firm line with such perfect composure. That effort always cost something. It had always cost something. She stopped on the edge of the road, set her bag down, and took 3 breaths. Then she picked up the bag and kept walking. Garrick was at the shop doorway when she came around the corner, replacing the leather on a set of harness fittings. He looked up, took in whatever was on her face that she hadn't entirely smoothed out yet, and said nothing. She went inside and put the groceries away. He came in at 6. She put a pot of bean soup on the table and a plate of biscuits and sat down and served them both without speaking. He ate half a bowl and said without looking up, Adelaide Pruitt get to you. Eliza looked at him. Small town, he said. And Bates talks. She didn't get to me, Eliza said. She inconvenienced me for approximately 2 minutes. He looked up then. Something in his face was careful and honest at the same time. She went after Margaret too, he said. First year we were here, Margaret laughed at her. He picked up his biscuit. I couldn't do that, but Margaret thought it was the funniest thing. Said a woman like Adelaide was a mirror, she was only showing you what she was afraid of herself. Eliza was quiet a moment. That's a generous interpretation, she said. Margaret was a generous person, he said. He said it the way you say something true that also costs you something to say. Not for sympathy, just because it was true. She sounds like she was, Eliza said. He nodded once and went back to his soup. That was the most he'd said about Margaret since Eliza had arrived. She didn't ask for more. She understood that some things are offered once, and asking for a second portion is a different kind of thing entirely. After supper, she brought her account book to the table and worked out the winter provisions more precisely. Based on what Tobias had told her, the supply irregularities around Croft's ledger were not isolated incidents. They were a system. She didn't know yet what kind of system, whether it was simple incompetence or something with more deliberate architecture. But either way, if the county's allotment came in short again, the families who had already lost prepaid orders would have nothing to fall back on. She got up and went to the doorway of the main room. Garrick was at the table by the fire with a piece of metalwork, a hinge assembly. She thought something he was designing rather than executing, working it out on paper with a methodical attention that matched the way he worked iron. "The supply situation," she said. He looked up. "How many families in Red Hollow have less than they should going into winter?" she said. He set the pencil down. "More than Croft's ledger shows. You know about the ledger." "I know something's wrong with it," he said. "I don't know the shape of it." "I think I might," she said. He looked at her steadily. She came in and sat in the chair across from him. The chair that had probably been Margaret's, she realized, and which he had never specifically told her not to sit in, and laid out what she had. Tobias's father's missing grain order, Mrs. Alderman's lamp oil, Dix Farley's repeated shortfalls, the way Croft had held his ledger at the meeting, the way the town had gone quiet instead of arguing. Garrick listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Croft has been on that committee for 6 years, he said. "How long have the shortfalls been happening?" He looked at her. 5 years. The silence between them had a different quality now, not the companionable silence of two people who have nothing to say, but the taut silence of two people who have just said something that can't be unsaid. "Tillman," Garrick said after a moment. "Who's Tillman?" "Aldous Pruitt's business partner. Runs the county supply contract. Has for—" He stopped. 6 years. Eliza absorbed this. "Pruitt," she said. "As in Adelaide Pruitt." "As in—" She thought about Adelaide's smile and its particular architecture. She thought about the way she had said, "We're very protective of our own," and the precise placement of the word own. "They're diverting the supply allotments," she said, "or some portion of them. Charging the county for the full order delivering short and pocketing the difference," Garrick said. "Or selling the surplus elsewhere." "Do you have proof?" "No," he said. "Nothing I could take to anyone who'd listen." His jaw tightened. "I raised it once, 3 years ago, with the county land agent." He was quiet. "The land agent is Tillman's cousin." Eliza looked at him. The scar along his jaw was very still. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "That's what happened. Nothing happened, and I went back to my shop, and the next winter was shorter than it should have been, and old Harlan Beach lost 3 fingers to frostbite because his lamp oil ran out in February." He said it flatly, the way you say something you have rehearsed in your head until it has worn smooth from handling. "You've been carrying that for 3 years, she said. "It's not a thing you put down," he said. She understood that too. She looked at the account book in her lap. She thought about patterns. She thought about the fact that she had been in Red Hollow for less than 3 weeks and had already seen more of its shape than the people who'd lived in it for years. Not because she was smarter, but because she had arrived without the particular blindness that comes from being inside something too long. "I need to look at the original county records," she said. "Not Croft's ledger, the county's, what was promised versus what arrived." "Those would be at the county office," Garrick said, "in Dalton, 40 miles. Is there anyone with access to copies, someone who receives the delivery manifests?" he thought. "The railroad station master gets the manifests when supplies come in by freight." "Dolph Crane," she said. "You know him. He watched me come off the train," she said. "I don't think he liked what he saw." "Dolph Crane doesn't like much of anything," Garrick said. "But he's honest, bone-deep honest. He hates Croft and Tillman and won't say why, but I suspect—" "He knows," Eliza said. I suspect he knows something, Garrick said carefully. But knowing and being willing to say are different things when the bank holds the paper on your house. Eliza sat with that. I'll talk to him, she said. Garrick looked at her. You. He won't want to talk to you, she said. You already went to the land agent. He knows that went nowhere. He doesn't know yet what I'll do with what he tells me. And what will you do with it? She looked at him steadily. I don't know yet, but I'll do something. I'm not built for sitting on the shape of a thing and waiting for it to resolve. Something shifted in his face. Not the almost amusement she'd seen in the first days, but something more serious. And she thought something like recognition. You understand, he said slowly, that if Tillman and Pruitt figure out what you're doing, they'll come after your position here. They'll make things difficult. I'm aware, she said. I'm saying... He stopped, started again. I'm saying that this is a risk for you specifically. You don't have the same protections here that He stopped again, and she watched him navigate the sentence carefully. That a person with established standing here would have. She looked at him. Are you telling me not to do it? She said. No, he said immediately. Then we agree, she said and stood up. He watched her cross to the doorway. Eliza, he said. She turned. Dolph Crane takes his lunch at the hotel dining room every day at noon, he said. Corner table, always alone. She held his gaze for a moment. Thank you, she said. She went to bed and lay in the dark listening to the warm night and thinking about a system that had been running for 5 years and a town that had learned to be quiet about it and an old man with frostbitten fingers whose name was Harlan Beach and who she had never met and would never stop thinking about now that she knew it. Dolph Crane was already at his corner table when she arrived at the hotel dining room the next day at 12:05. He looked up when she came in and backed down at his food with the deliberateness of a man who has decided not to see something. She crossed the room and stopped beside his table. Mr. Crane, she said, I'm Eliza Vane. I'm staying with Garrick Hale. I know who you are, he said to his plate. May I sit down? I'm eating. I can see that, she said pleasantly, and sat down. He looked up sharply. She put her hands flat on the table between them and met his eyes. I'm not going to waste your time or mine, she said. I know you received the freight manifests for county supply deliveries. I know what those manifests say doesn't match what ends up in Croft's ledger. And I know you know it too. She paused. I need to understand the size of it. Not so I can do something stupid and get us both in trouble, so I know what I'm dealing with. Crane's jaw was rigid. I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Crane, she said. My first week in this town, I heard about Harlan Beach. Something happened in his face. I heard about him, and I thought about him for 3 nights running, she said. I didn't know him. I'll never meet him. But I know his name, and I know what happened to him. And I know that what happened to him was not an accident or a shortage or a distribution complication. It was theft. And I know that you know that too. Crane set his fork down. The dining room around them was mostly empty. 2 other tables, neither close. His voice, when it came, was so low she had to lean in. 4 years, he said. Going on 4 years, I've had those manifests. Every year I pull the comparison. Every year the delivered quantity is 15 to 20% below the county payment. He stared at the table. First year I thought it was error. Second year I went to the county office. He stopped. Tillman's cousin, she said. He looked up at her sharply. Garrick told me, she said. He told you. He was very still. He went to the land agent and nothing happened, and now you're here and you think... He stopped. What do you think you can do that he couldn't? I don't know yet, she said. But I need the manifests. Copies if you have them. Anything you've documented. If they found out I'd kept copies... Mr. Crane, she said quietly. What happened to your lamp oil allotment last winter? His mouth compressed into a line. I know the Pruitts hold your mortgage, she said. I know what that means. I know I'm asking you to risk something real." She paused. "I'm asking anyway." He stared at her for a long time. His food was going cold. Neither of them looked at it. "I have 3 years of manifests," he said finally. "At home. Locked box under the floorboard." He looked at her with eyes that were very tired and very old. "No one's ever asked me for them before." "I'm asking," she said. He picked up his fork, looked at his plate. "Come by the station at 5, he said. "When Croft's gone home. I'll have them for you." She stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Crane." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't let it go nowhere again." She walked back out into the August afternoon, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders. And she thought about a town that had been going short for 5 years, and the man who had kept records of it in a locked box under the floorboard because he couldn't make himself throw them away, even when it seemed there was nothing to do with them. She thought about what it meant that he had kept them. She thought about what it meant that she had come. At 5 o'clock, Dolph Crane handed her a leather pouch that was heavier than she'd expected. She tucked it under her arm and walked back to the house in the early evening light with the weight of 3 years of evidence pressed against her ribs. And by the time she came through the back door, Garrick was already in the kitchen pouring coffee, and he looked at the pouch without asking what it was. "Supper'll be late," she said, setting it on the table. "I need an hour first." He poured a second cup and set it beside her without a word. She sat down, opened the pouch, and began to read. The manifests told a story that was worse than she'd expected and cleaner than she'd feared. Cleaner because clean things can be proven. She spread them across the kitchen table in chronological order while Garrick sat across from her with his coffee and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. 3 years of delivery records, each one stamped with the county seal. Each one listing quantities in Dolph Crane's careful station master hand. Grain lamp oil, medical supplies, preserved goods, seed stock for spring, column by column, year by year. She pulled Croft's public ledger figures from memory. She'd heard them read aloud at the meeting, and she had the kind of memory that held numbers the way good iron holds a shape and wrote them on a separate page. The gap was not 15%. It was closer to 30. "Garrick," she said. He leaned forward and looked at the page she slid across to him. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. She watched his jaw tighten and the scar along it go pale. 30%, he said. "On average," she said. "Some years higher. The lamp oil runs closer to 40. He set the page down. "That's not skimming. That's systematic." "Yes," she said. "It's been designed. The county payment goes to Tillman's contracting office. Tillman delivers short and sells the surplus privately feed stores in Dalton, most likely, or further west, where no one's comparing prices. Croft adjusts the ledger to match the short delivery and calls it a distribution complication." She paused. "The money goes somewhere between Tillman and Pruitt. I'd need the bank records to prove the last part. But the delivery gap is documentable with what we have." He stared at the manifests. "Harlan Beach lost those fingers in February," he said. "His lamp oil ran out. He said he'd ordered double his usual allotment because his wife was sick." He stopped. "She died in March." Eliza was very still. "Her name was Dot," Garrick said. "She'd been in Red Hollow since before the mine opened. She used to bring food to the church for anyone who needed it." He looked up. "She died because she was cold." The kitchen was very quiet. "Then we make sure it doesn't happen again," Eliza said. "How?" He said it without defeat, without hope, just as a genuine question. One man asking another person who seems to be thinking more clearly than he currently can. "Step by step," she said. "First, I need to talk to Dix Farley." Garrick looked at her. "Why Farley?" "Because he's already angry, and he's not afraid to say so in public. That means he'll talk. And because his livestock losses are documented, he'll have receipts, feed records, something. We need more than Crane's manifests. We need the families who were shorted to tell what they're missing in their own words." "You want to build a case," he said. "I want to build something no one can dismiss as a misunderstanding," she said. Tillman's cousin dismissed you because you came alone with a suspicion. I'm not going to come with a suspicion. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the replaced porch board on the second morning revising something. Adelaide Pruitt will know what you're doing, he said, before you've finished. I know. She'll move against you. I know. Against your position here, he said carefully. She has influence with enough people in this town that she could make it difficult for you to stay. Eliza met his eyes. Are you telling me that if she comes for my position, you'll ask me to leave? He looked at her steadily. No, he said. I'm telling you that she'll try. And I want you to know I won't let her. It was the most direct thing he had said to her since she'd arrived. She held it for a moment, turned it over, understood its weight. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and looked back at the manifests. Tell me what you need. Dix. Farley was not a gentleman and did not pretend to be. He was 53 years old, weathered to something close to iron himself, and he received Eliza on his porch the next morning with the wariness of a man who had been disappointed by enough people that he'd made a policy of it. He looked at her, really looked the kind of looking that takes inventory, and said, You're Hale's woman. I work for Garrick Hale, she said. I'm Eliza Vane. What do you want? To show you something, she said, and handed him the comparison sheet she'd written out the night before. 2 columns. County payment records on one side, actual deliveries on the other. 3 years. His name appeared in the shortfall column twice. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Where'd you get this? He said. Someone who's been keeping records and waiting for someone to ask for them, she said. Farley looked up. His eyes were very dark and very steady. This proves it. It proves the deliveries were short. To prove where the money went, we need more. What kind of more? I need every family that was shorted to write down what they ordered, what they paid, and what they received, she said. Signed, dated, with whatever receipts they kept. He stared at her. You think people will do that? After what happened when Garrick went to the land agent? I think people will do it if the right person asks them, she said. Someone they trust, not an outsider. He was quiet for a moment. You want me to ask them, he said. You stood up at that meeting, she said. They watched you. They didn't follow you then because there was nothing to follow toward. Now there's something. Farley sat down heavily on the porch step. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the ground between his boots. She waited. My wife wants to leave, he said finally. After last winter, she says she can't do another one like that. He looked up. I told her it'd be different. I didn't have any reason to say that. I just said it because I couldn't stand to watch her pack. Eliza crouched down so she was level with him. It was not a graceful motion, and she didn't make it one. She just did it the way she did everything practically without fuss. Then make it different, she said. Help me make it different. He looked at her for a long moment. Give me 2 days, he said. She stood. You have 1. Something sparked in his face. Surprise, and then underneath it, something that was almost a smile. All right, he said. 1. She was back at the house by mid-morning. Garrick was at the shop. She went to the smokehouse to inventory what was there and found Tobias sitting on the back step waiting. My pa told me what you did, the boy said. She stopped, looked at him. What did he tell you? He said you showed Mr. Farley the numbers. Tobias was picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. He said maybe something was going to happen this time. Maybe, she said. We'll see. He was real quiet last night at supper, Tobias said. Pa, in a different way than usual, like he was thinking hard instead of being sad. Eliza looked at the boy and felt something in her chest move in a way she didn't have an efficient name for. That's a good kind of quiet, she said. Yeah, Tobias said. He looked up. What do you need me to do? She looked at him for a moment. 12 years old and ready. Can you ride? She said. Yes, ma'am. I need messages delivered to 6 families before dark, discreetly. You know what that means. It means don't tell Croft or the Pruitts. Exactly, she said. She wrote the messages at the kitchen table, 6 of them, telling each family to speak with Dix Farley, and sent Tobias out with them before noon. Then she made bread because the bread needed making, and because there were moments when the most rational thing a person can do is put their hands in dough and let the body work while the mind works separately. She was shaping the second loaf when Adelaide Pruitt knocked on the front door. Eliza wiped her hands and opened it. Adelaide stood on the front step in a dress that was too formal for a mid-morning call, which told Eliza everything about the nature of the visit. "Miss Vane," she said, "I'll be direct." "Please," Eliza said. "I've heard that you've been asking questions around town. About the supply committee, about the county deliveries." Her voice was controlled, and her eyes were not. "I want you to understand that you are new here. You don't know the full context of how this town operates. And I would caution you very sincerely against involving yourself in things that don't concern you." Eliza leaned against the doorframe. "Mrs. Pruitt," she said, "when a family runs short of lamp oil in February and a woman dies of cold, that concerns me." Adelaide's face went very still. "That is a deeply unfair characterization of what?" Eliza said. "Of the delivery records, because I've seen 3 years of them. Signed. Stamped. Very clear." The stillness in Adelaide's face cracked just slightly at the edges. Eliza watched her recalibrate. "I don't know what you think you've seen," Adelaide said, and her voice had dropped to something quieter and more dangerous. "But I'd encourage you to consider your situation carefully. You're employed here on a month-to-month basis. You have no property, no standing, no family connections in this community. The people you've been speaking to are—" She stopped. "They can be persuaded to reconsider." "Is that a threat against my position?" Eliza said. "It's a practical observation." "Then here's mine," Eliza said. "By tomorrow evening I will have signed statements from at least 6 families documenting their supply shortfalls over 3 years, with receipts." She paused. "And 3 years of delivery manifests signed by the county stationer." She paused again. "And the name of the person who holds the contract for county supply distribution, which is your husband's business partner." She let that sit. "You can threaten my position, Mrs. Pruitt. I've lost positions before. What you can't do is make those documents not exist." Adelaide stared at her. Something moved through her face, not just anger, not just fear, something that looked almost like a reckoning. "You have no idea," she said softly, "how much trouble you are making for yourself." "I've been making trouble for people who deserve it my whole life," Eliza said. "I'm quite practiced." Adelaide left. Eliza closed the door, went back to the kitchen, and finished shaping the bread. Her hands were not shaking this time. Garrick appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. He'd heard the knock from the shop. She knew he had because he'd been at the far end of the property when she'd opened the door, and he was now standing in the kitchen with sawdust on his boots, which meant he'd come across the yard faster than he usually moved. "Adelaide Pruitt," she said before he could ask. "I figured." He looked at her carefully. "You all right?" "Entirely," she said. "What did you say to her?" She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She'll go straight to Tillman," he said. "Yes. And Tillman will go to the county office." "Yes. Which means we have less time than I thought." She turned back to the bread. "Farley has 1 day. He'll need to move faster." "I'll go talk to him," Garrick said. She looked at him. "You're not the only one who can do things," he said, and there was something in his voice, not irritation, something more like purpose. Like a man who has been standing still for a long time and has just remembered he has legs. "All right," she said. "Go." He went. She pulled the bread into the oven and started on supper and thought about timing and what Tillman could do in 24 hours and what she could do in the same amount of time and whether those 2 things were close enough. Farley delivered 11 signed statements by the following evening. Not 6. 11. Garrick brought them in, set them on the kitchen table, and looked at them the way a man looks at something he didn't entirely believe would exist. 11 families, he said. Who else signed? Eliza said. The Beaches, Harlan Beach's son, signed on behalf of the family. He paused on that. The widow Marchetti, 4 of the farm families on the East Road, and Orrin. The postmaster, Orrin, he confirmed. Said he'd been waiting for someone to put a paper in front of him for 3 years. She looked at the pile of statements and felt something that was not triumph. Triumph was too loud for this, but was in the same direction. We need one more thing, she said. What? We need someone to take this to the county, she said. Not the land agent, someone above the land agent, the county commissioner's office. She looked up. Someone they can't dismiss. Garrick was quiet for a moment. There's a circuit judge, he said. Comes through Dalton 4 times a year. Owes me nothing, connected to no one here. He was due in September, but... He stopped. But what? I heard last week he's coming early. Weather reports. He looked at her steadily. He'll be in Dalton in 4 days. 4 days. Eliza looked at the 11 statements and 3 years of manifests and the comparison sheet she'd written in her own hand, and thought about 4 days and what Tillman could do in 4 days, and what a circuit judge in Dalton might do with what she had. Can you get us to Dalton? She said. It's a full day's ride, he said. Can you get us there? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Outside, the wind had picked up. Not the warm summer wind that had been running through Red Hollow since August, something else. Something with a different character, a different purpose. It pushed at the kitchen window and rattled the latch in a way that was not violent, but was insistent, the way a thing is insistent when it has decided its time has come. Garrick looked at the window. The cold's coming early, he said quietly. I know, she said. Earlier than I thought. She looked at him. His face was very still, and his gray eyes had the particular quality of a man reading the world through senses that have been calibrated by years of paying close attention to things that don't speak. How early? She said. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe less. She looked at the manifests. She looked at the statements. She looked at the window where the wind was pushing and pushing. Then we ride in 3 days, she said. Not 4. He nodded slow and certain, the way a man nods when a decision has been made, and he has no argument against it, and wouldn't make one if he could. 3 days, he said, and somewhere out on the eastern edge of Red Hollow, the first clouds of the season were building in a sky that had been blue for too long, stacking themselves with the patient, terrible efficiency of a winter that had made up its mind. They rode out before dawn on the 3rd day. Eliza had never been a woman who made a production of preparation, but the night before, she'd laid everything out with the precision of someone who understood that the difference between a plan succeeding and failing was often a single forgotten detail. The manifests were wrapped in oilcloth inside her canvas bag. The 11 statements were folded separately, each one in its own envelope, with the family's name written on the outside in her clearest hand. The comparison sheet she'd made was copied twice, 1 copy for the judge, 1 copy she kept on her person tucked inside her coat. Garrick had the horses ready at 4 in the morning without being asked. She came out the back door into the cold dark and found him checking the saddle girth on the gray mare he'd chosen for her, a solid, even-tempered animal named Ruth, which Eliza appreciated both practically and as a matter of nomenclature. He looked up when she came out. You eat, he said. Before I came down, she said. He handed her the reins without another word and swung up onto his own horse, a big roan. He called nothing in particular, just horse, because Garrick was not a man who named things easily. They rode in the dark for the first hour without speaking, and the silence was not empty. It was the silence of 2 people who have said everything necessary and are now simply doing the thing. The cold was real now. Not the suggestion she'd felt at the edges of the August nights, but an actual cold with weight and intention. It sat in the air and pressed into her coat and made her glad for the scarf she'd added at the last moment over Garrick's non-committal glance. You were right about the timing. she said when the sky began to go gray at the horizon. Usually am about weather, he said. Not boastful, just factual, the way he said most things. 12 days early, you said. 10 now, he said. Maybe 9. She looked at him. You can tell that from 2 days. The iron tells me, he said. Metal changes in cold air, changes in the way it works, the way it holds heat. I've been reading it since I was 14. He was quiet for a moment. My father thought I was making it up, said it was superstition. A pause. He lost 3 horses to a storm he didn't see coming. I saw it coming. Did you tell him? I told him, he said. He didn't listen. She understood that too. She understood it in a way she didn't say out loud. They made Dalton by early afternoon, the horses tired but steady, and Garrick took them to the livery, while Eliza asked at the post office for the circuit judge's location. The clerk, a young man who looked at her with the particular uncertainty of someone calibrating how to respond to a woman asking official questions, told her after a moment's hesitation that Judge Arlen Haas was staying at the Dalton Hotel and was in session at the county courthouse until 4. It was 2:30. Thank you, Eliza said, and went to find Garrick. They had 90 minutes. He listened to the timing and said, Do we wait or do we go in? We go in, she said. I'd rather interrupt a session than miss him entirely. The county courthouse was a 2-story building with the self-important architecture of institutions that want to be taken seriously. Eliza walked through the front door with her oilcloth package under her arm and Garrick at her shoulder. And they told the clerk at the front desk that they needed to see Judge Haas on a matter of county fraud and that it was time-sensitive. The clerk looked at Eliza. He looked at Garrick. He looked at the oilcloth package. The judge is in session, he said. I know, Eliza said. Please tell him that Garrick Hale of Red Hollow has documentation of a systematic supply fraud affecting 14 families, including 3 years of delivery manifest, 11 signed witness statements, and comparative payment records. Tell him we've ridden 40 miles this morning, and we have perhaps 9 days before the first major snowfall cuts Red Hollow off from outside assistance. She paused. Tell him Dot Beach died in March. The clerk stared at her. Tell him that last part specifically, she said. He went. They waited in the hallway. Garrick stood with his hat in his hands, turning it once, twice, 3 times at the brim, in a slow rotation that was the only sign she'd ever seen that he was nervous. She stood still and kept her hands quiet, because she had learned a long time ago that stillness cost nothing and communicated everything. 8 minutes later, the clerk came back. Judge Haas will see you, he said. Now, Arlen Haas was 60 years old and built like a man who had been compact once and had simply added to himself over the decades without losing any of the original structure. He had sharp eyes under heavy brows and the manner of a man who had spent 40 years listening to people try to convince him of things and had become very good at knowing when someone was telling the truth. He looked at Eliza first, which she noted. Sit down, he said. Both of you. You said 3 years of manifests. Yes, sir, Eliza said, and opened the oilcloth. She walked him through it methodically. She did not editorialize. She did not perform emotion. She laid the documents in front of him in order and explained what each one showed and how the numbers compared and what the gap represented in practical terms. Family's provisions, the specific deficit in lamp oil that had contributed to the death of Dorothy Beach in March of the previous year. Haas looked at every document. He asked 3 questions. She answered all 3 without hesitation. Then he looked at Garrick. You went to the land agent 3 years ago. Yes, sir, Garrick said. Terrence Millward. Yes, sir. Haas made a sound in the back of his throat. Millward is Tillman's cousin, he said. Which I expect you know since you're sitting in my office. We know, Garrick said. What made you think coming to me would be different? Garrick looked at him steadily. Because you don't owe Tillman anything, he said. And because I'm not coming alone this time. Haas looked at Eliza. How long have you been in Red Hollow? he said. 5 weeks, she said. He stared at her. 5 weeks. Yes, sir. And in 5 weeks you assembled this. He gestured at the table. Not with surprise exactly, with something more like assessment. I had help, she said. The station master had kept the manifest for 3 years. He just needed someone to ask for them. Mr. Farley gathered the family statements in 1 day. She paused. The evidence was always there. It just needed organizing. Haas leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Tillman's contracting office, he said. You believe the surplus is being resold. Feed suppliers in Dalton or West, she said. The numbers suggest the surplus runs between 15 and 40% depending on the commodity. At commodity prices, that's a significant sum, Haas said. Over 3 years. He looked at her sharply. You calculated it. Last night, she said. She slid the final page across the table. He looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. I'm going to need these originals, he said. I made copies, Eliza said. Everything on this table is a copy. The originals are secured elsewhere. Something that might have been a smile crossed Haas's face and disappeared. Smart, he said to no one in particular. He looked at Garrick. I'm going to send a deputy to Red Hollow tomorrow. He'll need the original documents, and he'll need those 11 families to be willing to speak. They'll speak, Garrick said. And Crane, the station master who kept the manifests. He'll cooperate. He's been waiting to cooperate for 3 years, Eliza said. Haas nodded. He gathered the documents into a careful stack and looked at them one more time, the way a man looks at something he recognizes as significant and is taking a moment to fully reckon with. Miss Vane, he said. Yes, sir. This is careful work, he said. Very careful. Careful enough that it'll hold. He looked up. Red Hollow's lucky you came. She thought about a train that was 3 hours late arriving on time, and a quarter-page advertisement with no flourishes, and a locked box under a floorboard that someone had been keeping for 3 years on the chance that someone would ask. I think Red Hollow was ready, she said. I just arrived at the right moment. They were 2 hours out of Dalton on the return ride when the first snow began. Not a blizzard, not yet just a fine-driven snow that came sideways on a wind that had found its purpose. Eliza felt it against her face and thought about 9 days and revised the number downward without saying so. Garrick said, We push on, don't stop. Agreed, she said. They rode harder. Ruth was willing and steady under her, and she was grateful for the animal's temperament, the way you're grateful for solid ground under uncertain conditions, not consciously, just as a baseline fact of survival. Somewhere in the second hour, Garrick pulled his horse alongside hers and said without preamble, You didn't tell him you'd only been there 5 weeks. She looked at him. I did tell him. I mean, you didn't say it like an apology, he said. Most people would have. She thought about that. Why would I apologize for it, she said. He looked at her steadily through the driven snow. Most people feel they need to qualify themselves, he said. Establish why they should be listened to. The documents establish that, she said. I'm just the person who brought them. He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved through the snow side by side. Margaret used to say something like that, he said. She'd say, let the work speak and save your voice for things the work can't say. Eliza looked ahead at the road. She was right, she said. Yeah, he said. She usually was. They rode in silence for a while, and the snow thickened and the wind came harder, and neither of them said what they were both beginning to understand, that the weather was not going to give them 9 days or 10. That the winter Garrick had felt in the iron was deciding not to wait. They came back into Red Hollow at 9 in the evening cold, to the bone horses blowing hard snow coming steadily now. Tobias was on the front porch of the house, which was not a thing Eliza had told him to do, and which told her immediately that something had happened. He came off the porch steps before they'd even dismounted. Mr. Croft was here, he said, this afternoon. He came to the house and asked for you. I said you weren't here. He said he'd wait, and I said he couldn't, and he left. The boy's voice was tight with the effort of having handled it. He went straight to the Pruitt house after. Garrick and Eliza exchanged a look over the boy's head. Did he go anywhere else? Eliza said. The telegraph office, Tobias said. Bates saw him go in. Tillman. Croft had sent word to Tillman. How long ago? Garrick said. 4 hours maybe, Tobias said. 4 hours. Enough time for Tillman to respond to plan to move. Go home, Eliza told Tobias. Don't go to the post office or the telegraph office tomorrow morning. Don't tell anyone you were here tonight. He looked at her. Is it going to be all right? Yes, she said, and meant it with the flat certainty of a woman who had already decided it would be. He went. Inside, she got out of her coat, and Garrick built up the fire, and they stood in the main room's warmth, and thought separately about what 4 hours meant. Tillman can't get to Haas, Garrick said. Haas is independent, circuit judge. No, she said. But Tillman can come to Red Hollow. He looked at her. If he gets here before the deputy does, she said, he can pressure the families. Not legally, not in a way that holds up, but enough to make them afraid to speak. She paused. Adelaide Pruitt will already be working on that. She'll have been to 3 houses by now. Which houses? The ones she thinks are weakest, Eliza said. The ones with the most to lose and the least to stand on. Garrick's jaw set. Farley, he said. No, Farley's solid. The Aldermans maybe. The widow Marchetti. She thought quickly. And Crane. If they get to Crane. I'll go to Crane, Garrick said, already moving toward his coat. Now it's past 9. If Adelaide Pruitt's already moving now is exactly when, he said. She looked at him. He had the look of a man who has woken up from something, not dramatically, not with a speech, just quietly, completely, in the way that a fire catches when you finally give it enough air. All right, she said. I'll go to the Aldermans. It's snowing, he said. I know, she said, and put her coat back on. She was at the Alderman house in 10 minutes, knocking on the door in the snow, and when Clara Alderman opened it with the look of a woman who had already been visited once this evening, Eliza knew immediately that Adelaide had been there first. Mrs. Alderman, she said. I know it's late. May I come in? Clara Alderman looked at her for a long moment, a small woman perhaps 60, with worn hands and careful eyes, and the expression of someone balancing 2 fears against each other. Adelaide Pruitt said the judge wouldn't listen, Clara said. She said the documents wouldn't hold up. She said anyone who signed a statement would be looked at by the bank when their mortgage came due. Eliza looked at her steadily. Judge Haas has the documents right now, she said. He's sending a deputy tomorrow, and Adelaide Pruitt threatening mortgage review is itself a form of coercion, which I will document and include in everything we send to Haas if you tell me exactly what she said. Clara stared at her. She can't do that, she said. Not quite a question. She just did do it, Eliza said. Which means it goes in the record too. She paused. Mrs. Alderman, you signed that statement because it was true. That didn't stop being true because Adelaide Pruitt came to your door. Clara Alderman's chin came up very slowly, like a woman remembering something about herself she'd set aside. No, she said. I suppose it didn't. Is your statement still yours? Eliza said. A pause. Then, yes, Clara said. It is. Then nothing's changed, Eliza said. I'll be back in the morning. Keep your door locked tonight and don't answer it for anyone who isn't me or Garrick Hale. She went to the widow Marchetti next, who had not yet been visited, and who, upon hearing what Adelaide Pruitt was likely to say when she arrived, compressed her lips into a line and said with great economy, "Let her come," and poured Eliza a cup of coffee that she drank standing at the kitchen counter because there wasn't time to sit. She was back at the house by 11. Garrick came in 20 minutes later, snow on his coat, and said without sitting down that Crane was steady, had not been approached yet, and had moved the original manifests to a second location just in case. Good, she said. The Aldermans? Clara's holding, she said. I think she'll be all right. He looked at her across the room. The fire was low, and the snow was audible against the windows, now a sustained hiss that had not been there when they'd left that morning. "We did what we could tonight," he said. "Yes," she said. "The deputy will come tomorrow." "If the road holds." He looked at the window. "It'll hold through tomorrow," he said. "Barely." She nodded. They stood there for a moment in the low light, with the snow pressing at the windows and the weight of the day settling into both of them, and neither of them said the thing they were both aware of, that the distance between where they'd been 3 days ago and where they were now was not just miles or days, but something more significant and less nameable, the distance between two people who are cautiously occupying the same space, and two people who have ridden 40 miles in the cold and stood in front of a judge together and come back in the snow to defend what they'd built. "Get some rest," Garrick said finally. "You too," she said. She went to her room and lay in the dark and listened to the snow and thought about Dot Beach and thought about Clara Alderman's chin coming up and thought about 11 families who had put their names on paper because someone had finally asked them to. She thought about what tomorrow would bring. She thought about the deputy and the road and the weather and Tillman and Adelaide Pruitt and all the moving pieces of a thing that was no longer just a plan, but had become something real and consequential and impossible to stop now even if she'd wanted to. She did not want to. She closed her eyes, and outside, the snow came harder, and Red Hollow held its breath. The deputy arrived the next morning at 10:30, riding hard through 6 inches of new snow, and his name was Samuel Cord, a lean, quiet man of about 40, with the kind of face that had been shaped by years of seeing things clearly and not flinching from what he saw. Eliza had the documents ready at the kitchen table when Garrick brought him in. Cord sat down, accepted the coffee she poured without making a performance of it, and went through every page with the methodical attention of a man who understood that the quality of his reading right now would determine the quality of everything that followed. He read for 40 minutes. Eliza did not rush him. When he finished, he looked up. "Haas said you assembled this in 5 weeks. The evidence was already there," she said. "I organized it." Cord looked at her the way Haas had that particular measuring look of a man revising an expectation. Then he looked at Garrick. "I need to speak with the families today, before the weather closes in." "I'll take you," Garrick said. "All 11. All 11, Eliza said. "Tobias Farley will know where everyone is. He's at the house 3 streets over." Cord stood, picked up his hat. "And Crane. Crane first," she said. "He has the originals." Cord nodded. He looked at her one more time before he went. "You staying here?" "Someone needs to," she said. "In case Tillman arrives." Cord's eyes sharpened. "You think he'll come personally?" "He sent a telegraph 4 hours after he knew we'd been to Dalton," she said. "He's not the kind of man who delegates the things he's most afraid of." A pause. "You want me to leave someone with you?" "No," she said. "Go get the statements confirmed. That's what matters." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said simply, "Yes, ma'am," and went. She watched them leave from the front window. Cord and Garrick and young Tobias, who had appeared on the porch again at 8 in the morning with the reliability of a person who has decided to be useful and committed to it fully. 3 figures moving through the white street, purposeful and quiet. She turned back to the kitchen, cleaned the cups, and waited. Tillman arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She heard the horse before she saw him too fast, for the conditions the animal's hooves clattering on the ice-crusted road with the urgency of a man who had ridden hard from Dalton and not taken care about it. She was at the back of the house, checking the smokehouse inventory, when she heard it, and she took her time walking back around to the front. Not from calm exactly, but from the deliberate choice to appear calm, which had served her better than actual calm on most of the occasions that required it. He was already at the front door when she came around the corner of the house. A large man, heavy through the chest with the well-dressed confidence of someone who had never had to consider what he'd do if confidence stopped working. He was knocking with the flat of his hand, rather than his knuckles, the knock of a man who considers doors a formality. "Mr. Tillman," she said. She. He turned. Whatever he'd been expecting, it was not her. Not specifically her, this large, unhurried woman coming around the side of the house in a work coat with a smokehouse inventory list in one hand and absolute composure on her face. He recovered quickly. "Miss Vane." He said it with the precision of a man who has looked her up. "I'd like to speak with Garrick Hale." "He's not here," she said pleasantly. "I'll wait." "He may be some time," she said. "He's with the county deputy." Something moved through Tillman's face fast and controlled, but she caught it. Recalibration. "The deputy's here," he said, not a question. "Has been since this morning," she said. He looked at her steadily. Then he said with the particular deliberateness of a man choosing his angle, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about the nature of my contracting arrangement with the county. I'd like the opportunity to explain the accounting to whoever's reviewing it. These are complex records. Mistakes get made." "The manifests aren't complex," she said. "They're quite plain." "Manifests can be misread. By someone without experience, perhaps," she said. "I have experience. Judge Haas has experience. Deputy Cord has experience." She paused. "Between the three of us, I think we've read them correctly." His jaw tightened. The confidence was still there, but its texture had changed, less assurance, more pressure. "Miss Vane," he said, "I don't know what you think you've accomplished here. But you've been in Red Hollow for what, a month? You don't understand the relationships in this county, the history, I understand that Dorothy Beach died in March," she said. He stopped. "I understand that Harlan Beach lost 3 fingers," she said. "I understand that Dix Farley's wife wanted to leave because she couldn't face another winter like the last one. I understand that 11 families paid for supplies they didn't receive and said nothing for years because the man who held the county contract was also connected to the man who held their mortgages." She looked at him with the patient clarity of someone who has organized her evidence and no longer needs to raise her voice. "I understand all of that quite well. What I don't understand is how you slept." Tillman stared at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something move in his face that was not anger and not calculation. Something older than both. Then it closed. "This will go to a court review," he said. "These things take time. The families have already spoken to Deputy Cord," she said. "Signed statements. This morning." She paused. "Whatever you came here to prevent, Mr. Tillman, happened 4 hours ago." He stood very still in the snow outside Garrick Hale's front door, and the wind came off the eastern hill with the cold weight of a winter that had decided to stop waiting, and Eliza watched him understand that the thing he had driven 40 miles to stop was already done, and there was nothing left for him here. He left without another word. She watched him go and felt no triumph and no particular relief, just the clean, flat satisfaction of a task completed correctly. Garrick came home at 4 with Cord behind him and Tobias trailing at a respectful distance. All 3 of them, snow-covered and deliberate moving. And Cord said before he'd taken his coat off that all 11 families had confirmed their statements, and Crane had turned over the originals without hesitation, and the matter was now formally in the hands of Judge Haas's court. Tillman came, Eliza said. Garrick stopped. "Here." "He left," she said. He had nothing to say that was worth hearing. Cord looked at her with an expression that was close to admiration and stayed close to professional. "He'll lawyer up," he said. "It'll take months, maybe into spring." "But it'll hold," Garrick said. "It'll hold," Cord said. "The manifests alone would hold it. With the family statements—" He shook his head slightly. "It'll hold." He stayed for supper. She'd had the sense to make enough and left before dark to make the first 10 miles back toward Dalton before the night closed in. Tobias went home with 2 squares of cornbread and the expression of someone who has participated in something significant and is still working out the full size of it. And then it was just the 2 of them, and the fire and the snow pressing its steady white weight against the windows of the house. Garrick sat at the table with his coffee and was quiet for a long time. Not the contained quiet of the early weeks, not the quiet of a man holding himself carefully inside himself, but something with more air in it. She noticed the difference. She had become, without quite planning, to fluent in the particular language of his silences. "Adelaide Pruitt came to the Aldermans this morning," he said finally. "Before we got there, Clara Alderman told her to leave." Eliza looked up. "Told her quite specifically," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile, but was in the same room as one. "Orrin said you could hear it from the street." Eliza thought about Clara Alderman's chin coming up in the lamplight and felt something warm move through her chest. "Good for Clara," she said. "Adelaide will leave it alone now," Garrick said. "She's many things, but she's not stupid. She knows when a thing has turned." He turned his cup in his hands. "Pruitt's going to have a harder time of it when the court reviews the bank's connection to Tillman's contracts. Haas mentioned it to Cord." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew about the bank connection before I did." "I suspected," she said. "Adelaide said something that first visit, about the bank holding mortgages and people being persuaded to reconsider. She said it as a threat, but it told me the bank was already involved in managing compliance." She paused. "People tell you a great deal when they're trying to frighten you. They have to explain the thing they're threatening you with." Garrick was quiet for a moment. "You think like a strategist," he said. "I think like a woman who's had to be careful her whole life," she said. "It's the same thing mostly." He looked at her steadily across the table, and the firelight was between them, and the snow was outside, and Red Hollow was quieter tonight than it had been in years. Quieter in the way that a place gets quiet when something that had been pressing against it for a long time is finally carefully beginning to lift. "What will you do," he said slowly, "when spring comes?" She looked at him. He was looking at the table. His hands were around the cup. The scar along his jaw was still. "I don't know," she said. "I hadn't thought about spring." "Most people do," he said. "Most people who come through think about where they're going next." "I'm not most people," she said. He looked up then. His gray eyes were very direct and very quiet, the way they were when he was saying something true that cost him something. "No," he said. "You're not." The fire shifted. A log settled. The snow hissed against the glass. "Garrick," she said. "Yeah." "I fixed your porch board the second morning," she said. "I reorganized your smokehouse. I replanted your beans. I rode 40 miles in the snow with your evidence and stood in front of a circuit judge and came back and held the line while you were out." She paused. "I'm not planning to leave." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I want you to know that I know you know," she said. Something happened in his face. Something she hadn't seen before. Something that was not careful and was not contained, that did not have the quality of a man holding himself back from anything. He looked at her the way people look at something they've been circling for a long time and have finally decided to simply look at directly. "Margaret would have liked you," he said. It was not what she'd expected, and it was exactly right, and she felt it land in her chest with the particular weight of something that is both a gift and an acknowledgement. "Tell me about her," Eliza said, and he did. He talked for an hour. Not easily at first, the words coming out the way things come out of cold ground in early spring, slowly, and with effort, and then more freely, and then with something that was close to relief. He told her about a woman who laughed at Adelaide Pruitt and brought food to the church and said, "Let the work speak," and who had come to Red Hollow with him when it was just an idea and a piece of land and a conviction that a man with a forge and a good eye for iron could build something worth building. Eliza listened. She did not fill the pauses. She did not offer equivalences or comparisons. She just listened, the way she listened to everything completely, without agenda, with the full weight of her attention given over to what was being said. When he finished, the fire had burned down to coals and the room was dimmer and quieter, and he looked at her across the table, like a man who has put something down that he has been carrying for 4 years and is surprised to find his hands empty. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she said. "For asking," he said. "Nobody asks." She looked at him. "People were probably afraid it would hurt you." "It does hurt," he said. "That's not the same as not wanting to do it." She understood that perfectly. The winter came in full force the following week. The blizzard Garrick had read in the iron arriving with everything it had promised, and nothing held back. Red Hollow locked down under 3 feet of snow, and the kind of cold that turns breath to vapor before it leaves your lips. But this year, the lamp oil was there. The grain was there. Deputy Cord had arranged an emergency supplemental delivery from the county. Before the road closed, drawn from the documentation, Haas had issued repayment partial and immediate of what had been diverted. Harlan Beach's son came to the door one morning in February with a lamp and a jar of his mother's preserved peaches. Dot's recipe. He said, his voice careful, and asked if Eliza would accept them. She accepted both. She put the peaches on the windowsill next to Enid Fenwick's jar, and she lit the lamp herself, and she let it burn. Enid came for coffee twice a week through the whole of the winter. Tobias shoveled the path without being asked, and accepted cornbread, and eventually began to accept supper as well, until Eliza mentioned it to Dix Farley, who looked embarrassed and grateful in equal measure, and said the boy had always been drawn to places where things were actually happening. The court proceedings against Tillman and Croft moved forward in Dalton through January and February, and Aldous Pruitt's connection to the supply fraud was formally established in March, and the bank's management of the county's compliant families was included in the record exactly as Eliza had documented it. Adelaide Pruitt did not come to Garrick Hale's house again. Eliza saw her twice on the main street through the winter, and both times Adelaide looked at her with an expression that had moved past hostility into something more complicated, something that held alongside everything else a kind of grudging recognition. Eliza nodded politely both times. Adelaide nodded back. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. The first real thaw came in late March. Not warmth, exactly. Just the quality of the cold changing, losing its absolute authority. The snow beginning to think about something different. Eliza was in the kitchen garden that morning, the ground still half frozen, assessing what had survived the winter and what would need to be replanted when Garrick came around the corner of the house and stopped at the garden's edge and watched her work. She looked up. The bean row held, she said. The potato patch will need to be turned. I know, he said. She went back to looking at the ground. He stayed where he was at the garden's edge in the way he sometimes stayed near things he didn't quite know how to approach directly. Eliza, he said. She stood up and looked at him. He was not a man who practiced speeches. His face showed the evidence of this, the particular expression of someone who has something exact to say and is in the process of finding the most direct route to it. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as my cook. She looked at him steadily. The March light was thin and clear between them. Then as what? She said. As the person who stays, he said. As whoever you are in this house, which is someone I'd like to keep being in the same house as. It was not romantic in the conventional sense. It had no flourishes. It was like him, like the porch board, and the coffee, and the manifests wrapped in oilcloth, entirely practical, and entirely sincere, and more honest than anything decorated with borrowed words could have been. She thought about 14 months of other people's floors. She thought about 4 positions and a quarter-page advertisement with no promises it couldn't keep. She thought about a locked box under a floorboard and 11 families who had put their names on paper and Clara Alderman's chin coming up in the lamplight and Dot Beach's peaches on the windowsill. She thought about a man who had gone quiet for 4 years and was standing at the edge of her garden asking her to be the person who stayed. All right, she said. He nodded. Something in his face settled the way iron settles when it has found the shape it was always being worked toward. She turned back to the garden. He stayed at its edge for a moment, then went back to the shop. She heard the hammer start up a few minutes later, that same steady rhythm she'd heard the very first day, purposeful and clear. A sound that had been there at the beginning and was still there now. The heartbeat of a life that had room in it for more than grief and silence and endurance. Red Hollow did not become a different town that spring. It became a more honest version of the one it had always been trying to be. The families that had been shorted began to recover slowly and practically, the way real recovery happens without fanfare, one season at a time. Dolph Crane walked a little straighter. Dix Farley's wife unpacked the trunk she'd been keeping packed since January, and Eliza Vane, who had come to Red Hollow with one canvas bag and a lifetime of quiet endurance, stayed not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had finally found the rare and specific thing that a woman of her particular character requires: a place that knew exactly what she was worth and had the good sense to say so. Some homes are built from lumber and iron. Some are built from trust and time and the steady accumulation of ordinary mornings. The best ones are built from both, and they hold through every winter because the people inside them chose each other, not in a moment of easy feeling, but in the long, clear-eyed, irreversible way that means they will not unchoose each other when the cold comes back. And the cold always comes back. But so does she.